Darkness imprisoning me. All I see, absolute horror. I cannot live. I cannot die. That part. That's what I listen to. Big thank you to today's sponsor, Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the easiest and most convenient way to find your next life insurance policy. Today, we're going to compare the Wharfedale Linton to the Mofi, Source Point 8s, to the Elac debut reference speakers from Andrew Jones. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's compare these three speakers, two of which were designed by Andrew Jones, one of which was not. We just passed 190,000 subscribers, so we are starting the 200,000 subscriber giveaways. Awesome. We have stuff from Emotiva, Q Acoustics, Vanatu, Black Ice Audio, U-Turn, Just Shelly Labs, amongst others. We're giving away thousands of dollars of hi-fi equipment. And the only thing you have to do is fill out the Google form, comment on this video, like this video, and of course, subscribe and then follow me on Instagram. If you don't have Instagram, it's okay. You don't have to create an account. The quicker we get to 200,000 subscribers, the quicker everybody gets their stuff. Awesome! So thank you for watching and please subscribe. Just finished the in-depth review of the Source Point 8s. I will post that right here or right here, somewhere at the top of the video. It's a phenomenal speaker. The problem with that speaker is that it comes in at $1,000 with the stands. You can save $250 if you go stands. Say that 5 times really quick. Not an inexpensive speaker for most people. However, I thought, why don't we compare this to the Linton? And another Andrew Jones speaker that's even more affordable, the Elac debut reference. A little bit long in the tooth. The Linton have been around for a while too, but the good thing about a good speaker, doesn't matter how long it's been around, it's still a good speaker. A pair of the Wharfedale Linton, they come in at $1,500, including the stands, which I think is a $500 discount. So literally half the price of the Mofi Source Point 8s with their stands. The Elac debut reference, or Elac DBR62, come in at $700 right now, but they regularly go on sale down to around $500, $550. So at $700, even though they go on sale for $500, $550, we're reducing the cost by half again. Can a $700 speaker hang with a $3,000 speaker? Let's find out. I know if you're watching this video about audiophile stuff, about hi-fi stuff, chances are you're probably not a spring chicken. You probably remember buying vinyl, cassettes, and CDs in the store. That's why it's really important for you and me to have a solid life insurance policy. Why? Because there are people that depend upon you to put a roof over their head, to put food in their mouths, and to pay for higher education. So hopefully someday that 22-year-old that's still living in your house will spread his wings and fly. So just in case something terrible happens, they are still going to be taken care of financially. Pomeranians need food and the kids still need their sneakers. We have more technology than ever, but it seems like we have less time than ever. That's why it's cool, because Policy Genius can send out your information to a whole bunch of different providers to get you the best quote, the best price on the life insurance policy that you're interested in. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $25 per month for up to $1 million worth of coverage. Some options offer coverage in as little as a week and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius has licensed and apparently award-winning agents, and they have no incentive to recommend one company or the other. They're working for you. You deserve a better, easier, faster way to find affordable life insurance policies. So go to policygenius.com/cheapaudioman to find your new policy today. Thank you, Policy Genius. Specifications for the Wharfedale Linton: 8-inch woven Kevlar woofer, 5-inch woven Kevlar mid-range, 1-inch woven textile soft dome tweeter. Frequency response 40 Hz all the way up to 20,000 Hz. That's plus or minus 3 dB. Recommended power amplification 25 to 200 watts. Sensitivity 90 dB. So this is the most sensitive speaker on today's list. Nominal impedance of 6 ohms. They have Rear firing ports, 2 of them. A little bit big, 40.5 pounds apiece. They are 22 inches high, 14 inches deep, and 12 inches wide. The Elac debut reference DBR 62 come with a 6.5-inch aramid fiber woofer, 1-inch cloth soft dome tweeter, 44 up to 35,000 hertz, sensitivity 86 dB. So this is the hardest speaker to drive. Nominal impedance 6 ohms, 18 pounds apiece. Vinyl finish. No wood. These Source Point 8s come in with an 8-inch twin drive concentric driver, which I think is paper. Includes 1.25-inch soft dome tweeter. Faceted front baffle. Frequency response 47 up to 30,000 hertz. Sensitivity 87 dB. Impedance 8 ohm nominal. Little over 11.5 inches wide. They weigh in at 27.9 pounds. And all those specs don't mean diddly. About the only spec that actually means anything is sensitivity, and that really doesn't mean that much. These songs I listened to: Lena, Hall, Creep, her cover of the Radiohead song. Basically the 2-minute mark to about the 2-minute 40-second mark is the part that I listened to. Scentless, Apprentice by Nirvana off the In Utero album. Pretty much the first 30 seconds of that song. Intergalactic, about the first 30 seconds of that song. One by Metallica off the S&M 2 album. Around the 6-minute mark, maybe 5.5-minute mark, when James comes in, it's like, darkness imprisoning me, all that I see, absolute horror, I cannot live, I cannot die. That part. That's what I listened to. So I listened to that part on one speaker, took it down, put another speaker up, listened to it. I also level matched them to ear. Nothing really crazy, but I checked a decibel meter on my phone and just made sure that I had them somewhat similarly leveled out. There's enough difference, though, that I didn't have to be that crazy when it came to level matching. Creep by Lena Hall. The easiest way to describe the differences in these speakers is that there is more information and more detail coming from the Source Point 8s than there is coming from the Linton, and slightly more detail coming from the Elac debut reference. What does that mean? Just means her voice seems less veiled on both the Source Point 8s and the debut reference than the Linton. Now, it doesn't mean that those other 2 speakers are better than the Linton. It just means that they're different than the Linton. And if you are looking for the utmost clarity in female vocals, then the Source Point 8s and the debut reference, probably a better choice than the Linton. However, when we're talking about soundstage within these speakers, the Linton actually does the best for a center image. The Source Point 8s do a little bit better job with forward to aft imaging, but we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about Metallica 1. As far as Lena Hall, though, she was locked in with the Linton and slightly above tweeter level. With the Source Point 8s, she was in the middle, but she was actually slightly stepped back with less of a locked in center image. That probably could be mitigated by toe-in and messing around with the speakers a little bit, but the Lintons, I just threw them up and boom, locked in center image. Center imaging on the debut reference was about the same. I would say maybe a little bit forward of the Source Point 8s. But I don't know if it's the size or the way the baffle is reflecting the sound, but the Linton was the easy winner when it came to soundstage and imaging for the center image. This is an example of when specs don't tell the whole story, because if I'm looking at the low frequency roll-off for the Linton, it's 40 compared to 47 on the Source Point 8s. As far as the bass impact, though, the Source Point 8s felt like they had a lot punchier bass. They hit a lot harder than the Linton. I could hear the Linton rolling off lower, but for most people, when they listen to Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys, they'll point at the Source Point 8s and say, that has better bass. The debut reference, surprisingly, has about as much bass presence as the Wharfedale Linton does. The Linton does a lot better job of resolving detail within the bass though. I had all of these hooked up to the RMC1L from Emotivo, which is a surround processor, and then the power was being handled by the XPA Gen 3, my multi-channel edition, but they were only hooked up to the left and the right, and I had the subwoofer turned off. Also listen to these with the reference stereo mode from the RMC1L, which is like pure direct. Turns off everything except for the front and left channels. At least that's my understanding. It's the best way to get the best sound for 2-channel through the RMC1L. Editing Randy here. There is a series of whistle blowing during this segment. That is my daughter blowing a whistle she got at the school yesterday. It's not your smoke alarm. There's nothing wrong, but you're gonna hear it. I tried to edit it out, but it's just a child blowing a whistle. Scentless Apprentice by Nirvana off the In Utero album. The song starts off boom boom pop pop boom 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 pop pop. So a pop is actually the snare drum hit. If I'm talking about clarity with the bass drum, that you can really hear the subtle nuances of it, it goes source point 8, Linton, and then the Elac debut reference. As far as like punch, it goes source point 8, debut reference, and then the Wharfedale Linton. The most cleanly defined snare drum hit came from the source point 8s. Most cleanly defined snare drum hit was source point 8's debut reference, and then the Linton. When Kurt Cobain's voice came in, the Linton just had him a bit veiled. The thing about the Linton is it's more of a relaxed speaker, more of a laid back speaker through the mids and also the top end. But it also plays a lot of music really, really well and does have a lot of spatial cues that the other two speakers don't have. One by Metallica off the S&M 2 record. This is the busiest track. This is the most layered track that I listen to. This track has the most spatial cues from everything that I listen to. This track also has the most dynamics from any track that I've listened to. The Linton gave far and away the biggest and tallest soundstage from any of the speakers. However, the source point 8s gave more accurate depth information from a soundstage and imaging standpoint. The debut reference were good, but they weren't as good as source point 8s or the Linton in either category. There's a snare drum at the beginning, clearly defined on the source point 8s. When I really cranked it up, the debut reference did a pretty good job, but you really need to crank up the debut reference to get the treble to come in line with the bass. 80 dB and above, the debut reference tweeter really comes to life. As far as the Linton, you can kind of turn it up as much as you want, but you still have that overall laid-back sound signature. So the snare drum just has less of kind of an echo or reverb on the Linton as it does on the source point 8, and even the debut reference when the debut reference is turned up. About the 5.5 minute mark and beyond is where things really start to get moving. The Linton, I think, actually handled the complexity of the song better than the source point 8. But that's kind of lost when you're listening between the two because you just get more information on the top end from the source point 8. Debut reference sounded good, but it just couldn't keep up with the 3 different drivers of the Linton and how well designed the source point 8 is. The debut reference actually sounded a little bit more dynamic than the Wharfedale Linton, but the Linton did a way better job of keeping all the different instruments separated out, like the drums, like James Hetfield's voice, like the symphony, the percussion in the symphony, because there's chimes going on, dong, dong, dong. There's a lot going on in that track. I think the Lintons win when it comes to instrument separation. So what are my final thoughts? All great speakers, but I think they kind of scale at their price points. Is the source point 8s twice as good as the Linton? I don't think so. But sonically, they definitely present differently. That frequency response is a lot different between those two speakers. If your budget is $1,500, I think the Wharfedale is a great choice. If you know what you're getting yourself into with that relaxed top end, you can mitigate that with a little bit of EQ. You can also put a thinner DAC on there and maybe a very detail-centric amplifier, like something like that Iota VX, any of the Yamaha integrated, NAD integrated amps, and even some of the Chinese Class D stuff. Debut reference, need a little bit of juice, so I put AB power on those, anything from Emotiva. And they'll probably benefit from the same amplifiers that I talked about to partner with the Wharfedale Linton. Source point 8s, I think, are going to be the least picky about partnering equipment. The Source point 8, I think, is more of a flat reference sound, but still very dynamic on the bottom end. And I think most people are going to like the Source point 8s better than the Wharfedale Linton. The Wharfedale Linton, though, has definitely an audience with that British sound, laid-back sound. And the Linton's going to play just about everything well. It's just not going to have the top-end resolution or the clarity or perceived clarity that the Source point 8 has. I think the debut reference is more of a little brother to the Wharfedale Linton than it is to the Source point 8s. They're all good. They all sound a little bit different, but the Elac debut reference and the Linton sound the most similar. If I could only choose one, it would be the Source point 8s. Hope you enjoyed this video. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for my Patreon. You can also use the links in the description. Most of those are affiliate links. You can also buy me a cup of coffee. Down at the bottom of the video, there's a thanks button. Click on it, put a little money in the tip jar, but don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen maybe to one of these awesome speakers, the Elac debut reference, the Wharfedale Linton, or the Mofi Source point 8s, and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.